light. And then a blessing. I'd have had a hard time finding the stage without one. I plan to use this later to find my deer. Hopefully it won't run far. Something we see throughout the course of our life is light. Last night when I was in the hospital visiting my mother-in-law, it came to me as I watched a blind man with a dog get on an elevator, and I thought, he can't see what I see. He can't see light. Where there's light, there is no darkness. And we think of the Christmas season, we think of lights. How many have their trees up and how many have lights on their trees? Praise God, it's beautiful. It makes it homey, doesn't it? There's something about going off somewhere and coming back home to a place with lights on. I like when there's a light on when I get home. My wife and I did not build our home. We simply bought our home, and where the way the light switch is, now you're getting, in my bedroom there's a single light on the left as you walk in, and if you walk in around the corner, there's a double switch, and she's OCD to the point that she doesn't let me turn this one on because those are opposite then. Oh, Lord. Got another fan in the house back. But light. I hate it because I have to walk in the dark, turn the corner, and pray that nothing is in the way, which my wife is a very good housekeeper, but pray that the dog's not even laying there, and get those switches on and I'm relaxed. How many know my pain? Praise God. Light comes in many different colors. We kind of know what those colors are. How many have had a blue light in the last year? Don't confess, this isn't confession. We know what blue lights mean. Then we know what red lights mean. That's caution. We know what yellow lights mean, what green lights mean. They all have their main meaning, but light is so important. Light is responsible for the joy of our sight. That's what got me to last night as I was thinking about this. I had my message pretty much ready, and here was this blind man. He had a dog, and he was walking along. There was a whole group of us. We had a birthday party, but when we saw him coming, it kind of went quiet. And he made mention as he walked by, he felt the tension on his harness. He said, there must be a lot of kids here because my dog's wanting to go to the left, as he walked onto the elevator. But the joy of sight is enhanced by light, whether you're looking at yourself in the mirror or whether you're outside looking at nature. Light makes everything perfect and good. It completes things. In fact, I have an individual who carves out American flags out of wood. And these flags have ripples in them, and they have raised stars in them. If you watch my Facebook videos, you've seen them. But those there, you can hang them on the wall. You can put them on an easel. They're pretty, but they don't pop until you put light on them. Only then does it look good. It looks better. Light is used for enjoyment. We did a couple fun things this morning with light. We're not done doing things with light this morning, but they're also used for importance. Larry's trying to get his pilot's license, and he would have a major time landing his airplane without lights on the runway if it was dark. Am I right, Larry? Impossible. Lights are important. Christmas lights on our house outside, if you've driven by, they're not on. I won the battle this year. I do miss them, though. Something about coming home and seeing the Christmas lights. It's just warm. It invites you. I don't win every battle, but I will win the war. Promise. Matthew chapter 2, verse 10. It's talking about the wise men. It says, when they saw the star, the light. Now you have to understand that this was 400 years of complete silence from God. 400 years, they hadn't heard anything from him, seen anything of him. He hadn't done a thing. He had completely shut himself off from him. And all of a sudden, a star appears, and there's wise men that have studied prophecy. They knew that this was the promised Messiah. This must be it. And they start following the star. And it says they were, somebody say it for me. They were what? Because they saw a light. I think in Hebrew times, back in those days, as you go over there now, the electric infrastructure is still not what we have here in America. And I can imagine in those days, there was a distinct blackness of night and a distinct light that any lamp or the sunshine would have made. And in verse 11, on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. 400 years of silence. Here's a star. Here's a light. It's leading to the Messiah. And they found him by following a light. It burned into the darkness. And I wonder sometimes, how did they follow it during the day? They followed and they found him. And it led them to where Jesus was, the greatest gift to mankind. Jesus grows up. He starts a ministry. You guys have the Bible. You read it. It says a lot of things. Jesus says a lot of things about himself. He tells us a lot of things about himself. And through this study, I actually thought we might do a series on what he says and who he says he is. We're just going to do one here this morning. But I think it's important that we understand who Jesus says he himself is, so that we can get a bigger picture of what he's doing for us and the life that he completes for us as believers. Jesus said a couple things. He said, I am the bread of life. I am the vine. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. And as we look at John chapter 8, verse 12, this is not a Christmas scene. This is way beyond Jesus' Christmas scene. He is 33 years old where we pick this up. In John chapter 8, verse 12, he says this: when Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Somebody say, the light of life. Light of life. How many want that this morning? How many long for that this morning? We're going to tell you, my goal is this morning that you leave here with a fresh lit light that penetrates the darkness that's all around us, among us, in our families, in our circles, in our businesses. It's everywhere. And we're called to be the light. Here's the setting, and it's important to know about the setting of why Jesus was saying what he was saying when he was saying it. And here's where you guys chipped in and sent us to Israel. This is where this comes in handy for me, because I understand it. It's a picture that I can't erase because I was there. I actually did this one deed. I actually did it. And we'll get to it. John 8 is just basically a continuation of John chapter 7. If you read John chapter 7, you can read that on your own sometime, but it sets the environment, or it's the setting of what John chapter 8 and what he was trying to say. In John chapter 7, we see that it was the beginning of the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Festival of Tabernacles is what some say. This festival was typically run on the 8th month of the Jewish calendar. And if you look in a Jewish calendar, that would almost be our mid-September, mid-October. And so they were having a big festival. This feast lasted. They did this for 8 straight days. They never stopped. It was a party. And you wonder, well, now why would the Israelites party like that? The Feast of the Tabernacle was merely meant, it was just simply a commemoration, and they were doing it in honor. And inside of this ritual on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, every day they would do different things. And the one thing that I did, I'll explain it then. But they would do these little traditions, and they would do these little rituals, and they were all meant to give God honor and praise for his deliverance out of Egypt and for his provision in the wilderness. And they would do these things in honor for him. It was explained to me that in Jerusalem, they had houses built, and since they were tent living and makeshift living in the wilderness for 40 years, in these 8 days, they would literally take sticks and cloth and build tents up on top of their homes, and they would camp there for these 8 days, these 8 nights, just for remembrance sake. I hate camping, so I don't know that I'd have done that. Some of you would have. You'd still be up there. You love camping. That's cool. I like my king-size bed. But they would deck these things out. They would decorate them. They had all kinds of things hanging from. It was just a festive time, sort of like Christmas. We deck our homes out. We decorate. We put lights up. We want everything to be nice. And I want you to start visualizing all along the streets as you would go on top of all these homes are these makeshift shelters. They're all decorated up. There is a lot of decor and things on the floor. They've had a party for 8 days. And in John chapter 8 is the 9th day. And the party is over. And this is where Jesus starts talking. I want you to imagine also, it's still the 9th day, and I don't know how long you guys wait to take your Christmas decorations down. I know those from South Carolina probably don't take them down any, do they? We just leave them up. It's too much of a bother to take them down. We're early. You're late. January 1st, the cutoff date. January 10th. When the snow stops flying, what's your cutoff date? I don't know, but here we are on the 9th day, and we know these decorations are all still up. The city is still packed with people because they came from all over to come and celebrate and commemorate what God did for them. They were intentional on praising God. It was a beautiful tradition, this thing that they did. And in John chapter 7, you'll find this is the one tradition that I actually got to do while I was in Israel. If you walked into the courts of the temple, this was a makeshift temple. It was one it was like a portable one that Becky and I got to go into. And out front they had what they call the brazen altar. This brazen altar, I never understood why a priest would have why would he go over and get a silver pitcher? I did that. And he went over to the pool of Siloam. I didn't do that. But he went to the pool of Siloam. He got water, and he would come around on this brazen altar. There was a silver bowl. And they were very, very specific on which side of that altar they would pour that water. They would come over to the west side, because that's where Egypt was. And they would pour it in. You know why? To commemorate the fact that God had supplied them water. How many remember the story where Moses struck the rock instead of speaking to it? Water came. They were thankful for it. They still remembered that every single year they would do the same thing. They would go and get the water and they'd come and pour it out. And that's where Jesus stood down there in John chapter 7. He stood right there by that brazen altar and he said, hey, if you guys, I like your tradition, I can appreciate that, but here's the deal. If you guys would just take a drink of me, you would never thirst again. That's what he meant. You guys were so thirsty in the wilderness, and here you are commemorating that, and that's good, that's cool, I like it. But if you drink of me, you'll never thirst again. Does it start making more sense to you, the traditions that they were doing? I trust it does. All he was simply saying is, I am the God who provided for you in the wilderness, and I am the God, if you drink of me, you'll never thirst again. You'll be satisfied. It's a beautiful setting when you stop and think about it. I hope you're envisioning this, and you hope you're walking down the streets of Jerusalem with me. Here's another tradition that they did. So inside of the inner courts, they weren't allowed the women weren't allowed to go. They were a little bit more, the women's rights movement hadn't been yet. They had strategically placed all throughout, in the center of town, they had candelabras, specifically placed in 4 different sections. They call it the court of women. So the women were allowed to come there. That's probably why they still light candles, right? They were allowed to come to that point. And it was also thought by theologians, they say, according to that these lights, when they were lit, could be seen from any one place in the city of Jerusalem. And they did this to commemorate the fact that God led them through the wilderness. He led them at night by, who's with me? By a pillar of fire, and in the daytime he did a cloud. But at night he led them by fire. So this was to represent that we still remember God, that you led us out of the wilderness, you led us across the wilderness by fire. And so every year at the Feast of Tabernacles, they would light these, and they would continue to burn them for the 8 straight days. Now we're at the 9th day. The candelabras are still there, the lamps are there, but the lights are out. And on that 9th day, very early in the morning, it says, Jesus got up. Party's over, lights are off. And it's from that place that Jesus speaks in verse 12 when he says, I am the light of the world. I appreciate your tradition. I appreciate you remembering me. But I now am your light of the world. I will come into your heart and I will change you. What was he saying? I was the fire that led you. I was the cloud that led you. And that light that you can be seen all around the city, guess what? Look no further, it's me. I will be with you. I'm better than that candle. I'm better than that fire. Can you imagine what he was thinking and how he was saying it to these people? I am the light of the world. He was being very specific and very intentional. And a lot of times we will read over those scriptures and just glance at them. How in the world, if we know the setting, it makes so much more sense. Just look to me. I'm the light of the world. I believe very much these Hebrew people understood that metaphor very, very clearly. They understood more about darkness and light than what we do. They knew that light represented God. They knew that darkness represents evil. We get that, but I think they had they were right there in that moment. It was true to their culture, and they understood it. They understood that analogy. And I think for us to fully understand it, we're going to have to look deeper into what light means. And in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, it reads like this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. My goal today is to help you understand that before you were born again, and if you're not born again, you're sitting here today with void in your life, you're sitting here without form in your life, and you're sitting here with darkness in your life. You were just as the earth was before God created it. Light. See, only when light starts coming into our life can things start to be formed and things start to be created and things start to come to fruition for us. You get the setting, the Feast of the Tabernacles, the pool. And Jesus shows up and says, I am the light. I am the very same light that showed up on the first day of creation. And I'm the light of the world. Remember that condition of the world? It was formless, it was void, it was dark. And when light stepped in, all of a sudden things changed. That which was formless began to have structure. That which was void began to be filled. That which was dark, light started to filter in and things start to change. My question is, how many of us would agree that our lives have been like that? Dark, without form, it was void, empty. Without Jesus, we are very, very much formless. And as believers, we're being formed. That's the beauty of this story of Christmas. God sent Jesus here so that we can have that, we can see him in person, which they did back then. He has to walk around us, he is among us, and can teach us these stories that bring us closer and closer to him. The analogies are so specific. He's forming us. He's making us into what he wants us to be. I wonder how it sounded when God said, "Let there be light." I wonder how that sounded. You ever think about that? Let there be light? Or did he, let there be light? I don't know. It's interesting. But light was instantly. There's nothing in the world that compares to the speed of light. I believe that when he said it, it was done. I want you to think back to John chapter 8, verse 12, when Jesus stands in front of that crowd and he says, "I am the light of the world." What he's saying is, I want to be here when you are unformed and when you have a void and when you are dark. I want to start structure in your life. Doesn't matter where you're at in life. I want to be there. I'm going to keep form and structure in your life. Trust me, it's a process. Trust me, and I will guide you to the finish line. That's what he's saying in that text. Success doesn't fill it. Girlfriend don't fill it. Boyfriends don't fill it. Relationships here on earth don't fill it. There's a void. And if we have Jesus, he will start to fill that void. John 7, he goes, this is the chapter before John 8. John 7, he goes into the temple and he starts to teach. And then in John 8, we come there and we started in verse 12 today. But I want to give you a setting of someone who was lost, who had a lot of void, and there was a lot of darkness in this person's life. It actually starts John chapter 8, verse 1. Will you read it with me? I'm going to, by the way, this is so cool. Somebody gave me a bookmarker, and it says, "Be the light of the world." It was just a confirmation that I'm doing the right thing and preaching the right thing this morning. And then, how many get the verse of the day? Can't see very well, but let me read you the verse of the day. This was this morning at 7 o'clock. I already have my message. It says, "In him was life, and that life was the light of mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it." God winking at me. I love it. I want to read to you John chapter 8, verse 1, and I don't have it on the overhead, so just read it with me. John chapter 8, verse 1. Then they all went home, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Verse 2, "At dawn he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him." See, this is the part that I skipped. I actually started in verse 12 where he says, "I am the light of the world." Where all the people gathered around him, he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. Now, what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. And when they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, Let any of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first. That's interesting, ain't it? The older ones first, until Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. And Jesus straightened up. He asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you." Jesus declared, "Now go now and leave your life of sin." This is a woman who's caught in, this is the very preceding of the very verse. We like to pick and choose the verses we read, but I'm telling you, this was right on the 9th day, the one day after the Feast of Tabernacles. They are in the courtyard there, and Jesus is there, or up on the Mount of Olives, and Jesus is there teaching, and in the middle of his teaching, these guys come in, dragging this woman who they had caught in the act of adultery. Now, who in the world has time to go around and look to see who's doing what? They found her. I don't know how. The Bible doesn't say how they did it, but they found her and they brought her. And I don't think it was a pretty bringing in. I don't think she was formally walking in. I think they were probably dragging her because, see, the law of Moses condemned her to being stoned for what she had done. And so the Pharisees are saying, hey, if you're such a, and the people of the law, these guys that know everything, if you are so good at what you're doing, what are you going to do with this? What do you say about this, Jesus? This is against every law we have. Jesus he didn't say anything. He bent down and he wrote in the sand. When we were over there, the guy that I was with said that he thinks it might have been that he was writing the men's sins down. From the oldest to the youngest, they left. See? This was a woman, again, who on her darkest day, I don't know of a more embarrassing scene than that. Can you imagine being that person that gets drug in here right now as we're having church? Somebody comes dragging somebody in and say, "This one, we just caught her or him or her in bed," and like, yeah, I won't go there. Wouldn't that be something? That wouldn't be how we want to do things, but they did it because they were so adamant of painting Jesus into a corner so that he screws up, so that they have a reason to kill him. And it is right then and there that Jesus stands after she leaves. And in verse 12, "I am the light of the world." All that darkness is going to happen. That stuff's going to happen. You need me. I'll make it okay. Then he got up after that, he said, or before he said, "You are the light of the world," or "I am the light of the world." He said, "You who have no sin, cast the first stone." And one by one, they walked away. We have that setting. We have the saying, "I am the light of the world." And just like in the beginning, before Jesus, you're formless. It's a void and it's dark. Kurt, if you will bring your team up. I don't know where you're at. All I know is this. It's not fun having a void in our lives. It's not fun having darkness in our lives. And I know this, that God ordained Christmas to bring that light of the world into our lives so that we can see what it would look like to live a more fulfilled life. And if you're here this morning and you don't have Jesus as your Savior, do not leave here without talking to me or somebody from our elders team. We will help you. Don't go another Christmas without having that void filled. Don't go another Christmas without receiving Jesus, the real reason for him being here. Those of you who are living in darkness, and I'm sure in a room this size there are some. I don't know if you know this, but you think God doesn't see what you're doing. He sees it. In him there is no darkness. There's light. Just like when I walked up here. I can't miss anything. There's light. He sees it. You think that your husband doesn't know, but he does. You think that your wife doesn't know, but he does. You think your kids don't know, but he does. You think pastors don't know, but he does. And there's that darkness. And I think sometimes the darkness that I'm talking about is the secrecy in our lives. And I think the exit to freedom is sometimes through confession and just saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to step out into the light. I'm going to be exposed and I'm going to make my things right because I don't want to live with that void. The light of the world. I want you to imagine the festival is over. Candles are out. It's dawn. The sun's just coming up. And Jesus stands and faces the crowd and says, I am the light of the world. I'm not coming to get at you. I'm coming to help you. And I'm coming to lift you up. I'm coming to fill that emptiness and to illuminate the dark that is in your life. Jesus says in Matthew 5:14, and this is where it gets really, really good. He says this, once you have received me, once you are a part of me, once my light comes into you, guess what? Ye are the light of the world. Matthew chapter 5, verse 14. You are the light of the world. It's not just up to me anymore, because once you are infected by me, you become the light. He wants to use you. He wants to use me. He wants to use us. And I think it's appropriate that our name is Light in the Valley Chapel. I love that name, and I trust that it means more to each and everybody that leaves here today, that we are to illuminate a dark world. We're supposed to be that light. You can start music. Sometimes we struggle with, you can all stand. Sometimes we struggle with, I get this question a lot of what's my purpose in life? I mean, I know I've got my job and I've got this and I've got that going, but I really don't know what my purpose in life is. And I will tell you, I think one of the biggest purposes in life is just to be the light. To be like Jesus when he says, I am the light of the world, and we're his disciples. We're called to be that. And there's no better time to practice that than at Christmas time. It's a good starting point for us and to press in and to be intentional for the rest of the year and for the rest of our lives. To be that light. It's Christmas. Let's step into the light. Be free. Receive what God has given us this Christmas, and that's Jesus, the light of the world.